Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this special BookBrowse author video interview. This is our second interview for the BookBrowse channel, and I am so excited today to be joined by author Eve J. Chung, author of Daughters of Shandong, and her new novel coming out very soon, I believe next month, or is it right now?
May 5th.
May 5th,
Yeah.
The Young Will Remember. And we're going to be talking mostly about The Young Will Remember today. But first, I just want to say thank you, Eve, for joining me here for this BookBrowse interview.
Thank you so much, Peggy, for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk to you, and also to have this for your readers.
Excellent. Thank you. I know that several months ago, there was a Q&A on the BookBrowse site that our members did with you for Daughters of Shandong. But let's start big picture in this interview. Both of your novels explore women navigating really intense, dangerous moments in history. So what drew you to telling these type of stories initially?
So I think I've always been fascinated by human rights. So it ties into human rights, and especially women's human rights. Daughters of Shandong began with my own family story. And for me, being lucky enough to grow up without having to endure being a refugee like my grandmother, when I heard her story, I was really amazed by it, and I wanted to write it down initially for my children. So it all began kind of as a family endeavor to just record that history. And then as I was thinking about it and talking with my mom, I decided to expand it, because I was thinking a lot of people probably would like to hear this story. I don't think now, of course, it's better, but when we look at war, a lot of times women's experiences sort of fall to the sidelines. A lot of this is because I think in the past, there weren't as many women who were allowed to take roles as journalists or historians writing about what people went through. So I did want to be able to bring more of that to the forefront.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, what was that like, turning a very personal, family story into fiction? How did you do that exactly? How did you navigate that process?
Yeah, so I was on the fence. When I started writing it, at first I wanted to do what's called creative nonfiction, but I didn't really have a choice, because my grandmother passed away, I think now it's maybe 12 years ago. So there were things she told my mom, but there was a lot she didn't tell my mom. So we got to a point where I realized we can't say this is a true story, because I don't know chunks of what happened. So for example, we knew she was in Rennie's Mill, refugee camp in Hong Kong, but we didn't know specifically what happened to her there. So I ended up pivoting to fiction so I could really put a story together of what I think might have happened.
Okay.
So, which in some ways is a lot easier, because then I am flexible to maybe put them at the timeline that I need. I'm not even sure exactly when, like the duration of where she was in any of these places. I just know that she was there for maybe like an approximate amount of time. But then I could also create characters. So if there was something else I wanted to talk about for that time period, I could create a character for that.
And how long did it take you to write Daughters of Shandong?
It was relatively quick, in part because I was worried that if I didn't finish it, I would never finish it. Just because in the past, there's been times when I've thought, oh, maybe I should write a book, and then I would write a few chapters, and then it would die somewhere, and I don't even know where those drafts are. So this one, I was at a point where I told myself I just have to get it down, even if it's imperfect, even if it's not good, at least get the story down. And so the first really messy draft took 3 months. But that was also, I think, an unsustainable level of writing, as in I spent pretty much I had no hobbies. I didn't watch TV. I didn't meet friends. All I did was write. And the actual draft that went to my agent took about 6 months.
Okay. That's pretty good though. Yeah,
Yeah,
you did write that very quickly.
it was a
Um,
panic process.
I'm so curious. It sounds like you're like, I need to get this story down now. Did you feel like that this was going to lead into another book? Like, I'm going to be a writer now? I mean, because and if you want to talk about your background as a human rights, you work in that field. I mean, so that obviously informs a lot of your stories. But if you could speak to that, I'm curious how you're moving into this maybe this new life as an author.
So I had no expectation that it would go beyond one book when I wrote it. At that time, all I wanted was to get it published, period. Like there was no guarantee. For anyone who has gone through that process, you'll probably know that you have to get an agent. And that was the hardest part of my journey because I've never gone to study writing at a high level. I never did any MFA programs, so I didn't know other writers. I only knew other lawyers, and they're great, but there's no one I could ask to say, like, how did you go about this? So in this sense, I think the internet helped me a lot. I literally went on Google and Googled how to get published. And there were resources. And then back then, Twitter was kind of a different space. There was sort of this writing Twitter, and it's really through that I learned about agents. I made a lot of mistakes in terms of querying early on. But it's kind of, I think, in part, it's also luck. Like there were query strategies that I didn't follow at all. But that was, I think, the most uncertain process. And once I got an agent, she sold my book very quickly. And so when she sold my book, it was a 2-book deal then. And that helped too, because then it was kind of like, well, now I have to write a second book. And
Okay.
yeah, the second one was easier in part because I did the first one. So I was aware that I am capable of writing a book. So
Right.
just knowing that helps me, I think, have the confidence and be less afraid. So it actually took me a lot longer to write the second one because I wasn't as panicked then. But writing has always been a goal. I've always loved to write, and always, so I went to be a lawyer because that's sort of what you have to do when you have parents who came from a background of uncertainty. So my grandmother was a refugee. My parents grew up in Taiwan, and there was always a fear of war. My mom was saying that she was told to come to the US because they were always afraid there would be war. And at least if she was in the US, maybe it would be safer. So everything in their mentality is to have stability and have a life that's predictable. So as a child, I did want to become a writer, but my parents were very much against that because they said, there's no stability. We want you to be a doctor or a lawyer, which I think is quite common among a lot of immigrant families coming here. So I went to do law, but within that field, I went to human rights because I've always been drawn by stories. And I think even in that field, looking at women, you see a lot that when I watch a TV show or with some books too, the needs of women are left out. Like a lot of, especially I think on TV, like there isn't really a thought to the specific needs of women in these war zones or women like my grandmother who are refugees. So that definitely did make it into my book. There were things I put into my book because I was thinking, people should know that this is something women have to think about if they're displaced.
Well, that is definitely themes that I picked up. They're very large themes. They're very prominent in both novels. Women's, the marginalized voices, the silent voices, the voices that get lost in the major histories of war, motherhood, what it means to be a child in these type of war zones as well. So those are powerful themes. And I know with and now we're going to move into The Young Will Remember, because this is, wow, you really go broad with this scope. And I just loved this novel.
Oh, good.
Yes, absolutely. And at the end, I'm going to ask, hopefully you're working on a third book, but anyway, hope you keep writing, because, also your story is a an inspiration to let people know that, you can write, if you have a desire and you have a story to tell, you can do it, you
I
know?
really believe that. And I guess, I don't know if it's because I have small kids. I often think of that rat that cooks who, that movie Ratatouille, where he says,
Ratatouille, yes.
everyone can cook and everyone can write. I really believe everyone can write. Everyone has a story. I think it is the hardest thing. Well, I don't know. I mean, this might differ for every person, but I do think a lot of it is just the mental realization that, you can write a book. It's just time. It really is that time.
Hmm.
Eventually,
Time.
get it
Yep.
done. If
Putting in the hours at night, whenever, you get off your job, and, just putting in the showing up at
yes,
the screen, and putting in the work.
that, and also it's never too late.
Yeah.
That's another thing I love about writing is you can, like, there's no deadline. You can do it whenever. You don't have to have started. You don't need the training. I mean, I think there's a role for every story and an audience for every story.
That's well said. Well said. So The Young Will Remember. This book takes place within the Cold. I was going to say that. Well, there's Cold
Yeah,
War,
Cold War,
but
yeah.
there was the Cold War going on. But this is the Korean War. Many consider that the Forgotten War.
Mhm.
Um, so, what drew you? What made you want to explore that particular moment in history?
So my husband is half Korean, and
Okay.
his grandparents came to the U.S. from Korea, and his grandfather is North Korean. And so when I was thinking about this book, I thought I would like to do some story that ties together Chinese, Korean, and American history. And that's where I landed on this particular topic. And also, as I was looking into the Korean War, there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know as an American, having grown up in the US education system. I was pretty surprised by how little I knew about it. And so that kind of made me want to write about it even more.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I find it well, I'll lead into this with as we move into this question about your research. One of my favorite, I'm a huge history nerd. I read like all the books behind me. I have my own little YouTube channel called The History Shelf, and I feature history. Yeah, historical fiction, also some other fiction. Yeah, but I love history, and I've read several different books on the Korean War, and some of like the big battles, like the Chosin Reservoir, and
Mhm.
so that's what. And I really resonated with Ellie, and
Mhm.
I want to read a little portion once we get a little further along. But if you could talk about like how long did it take for you to research to where you felt like, okay, I've got a good grasp on the major things happening at this time frame when Ellie is over there. Yeah, what did your research look like?
It was a ton of research. So for the first book, I didn't have to do all that much because I did study the Chinese Civil War in school, and I have my family history. This
Mhm.
one, I really it was so much because it's sort of like one door leads to another. So history is all connected, and to really understand the Korean War, especially looking at women, you have to, I mean, I guess you don't have to, but for the purposes of my book, the Korean War starts only 5 years after the end of World War II. So everyone there is very traumatized by World War II. And so you do have to look at the impact of that in Korea, but
Mhm.
then that requires you to look at the Japanese occupation. So suddenly, it's like, okay, I have to look at the start of this war, but then I have to look at that war. And now I have to look at the annexation of Korea and how that happened and how that affected people. So I actually don't really know when. I don't think I stopped researching until I finished the book. Throughout the book, I researched. I did a ton at the beginning, and which isn't hard for me because I love history, and my earlier drafts, I love history, and so I put a ton of history in it, which I realized not everyone else is interested in. And so for both Daughters and this book, the first edits were cutting stuff out, and it's very hard for me. I know it's painful because I look and I think like people need to know this, but
Yeah.
then especially in talking with my agent, I realized I guess they don't have to know it. But I think it was my first drafts are always super long, like 130,000 words. So there's a lot of history that was cut out of this book. And I hope I hope it's a good balance. It's always tough because to me, I'm like, I could read a whole history book about this and not be bored. But
I
then
know.
this is a work of fiction, it's
Yeah.
for people who are maybe reading more recreationally. So, yeah, I love the research process. It's always so interesting. And but yeah, I do have to recognize that there's like, especially at the beginning of the book, a lot of stuff that I had to cut.
Oh boy. Well,
Especially the Chosin, which you also know about. Like you
I
could write
do.
a whole novel
I
about the
know.
Battle of Chosin. And I had to reduce it to, I think, like 3 chapters. And even within those chapters, there's a lot that I think later through, I forgot who was editing, was saying like, I don't think people need to know this. So
Oh no.
I mean, I understand it because it's very heavy if you're not necessarily a history buff, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, wow. Well, that's so neat. That's why I love having these conversations, because you kind of get like the inside baseball look, like, oh wow, she did have stuff on Chosen in here, and she had she had to cut it out. Um,
Yeah.
but this is what I love about historical fiction, Eve, is that uh this you pull the reader in so quickly.
Oh,
Yeah, you do. And our main character here is Eleanor Chang, but she goes by Ellie Chang.
mhm.
Could you talk more about this character? Was this a person that you've always had in your mind you wanted to write about? She's a war correspondent, Chinese American. Is there some of you in Ellie?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, when I originally was thinking about the story, I wanted Ellie to be a pilot. And this is where I was, I guess, wrong, because I knew there were the WASPs, the Women Air Force Service pilots in World War II. So
Yes.
logically, I was thinking, oh, well, women were pilots in World War II. Of course, they'll also be pilots in the Korean War. And I eventually found out that they kind of took a step backwards. I think World War I, there was such a need for manpower that they were forced, by they, I mean the military, they were forced to allow women to fly into the war zone. For the
Yeah.
Korean War, it was not the case. So, and also what's frustrating is women were allowed to join the Air Force. And so I knew that. So I was thinking, oh, yes, I will have lots of like female pilots to choose from. And then I found out women in the Air Force were not allowed to fly. They were at least not in Korea. So through all the documents that I looked at, I was told no women were in the war zone. No women were on the front lines. And I even wrote to this air museum and asked them, like, is this really true? Like, were there exceptions? And they said, like, yes, there were no women. So I was thinking like, oh, great, I can't have my pilot anymore. So I almost made her a flight nurse. But then it didn't match her personality, because I was thinking, if she's a nurse, I feel like she's going to try to stop and help all the injured people she sees. And
Yeah.
how am I going to write that in? Like, I don't know. And so that's where I came across Maggie Higgins, who it was a real life war correspondent. And I just think back to all of these narratives, no woman on the front lines. And this is sort of what I mean about how our like women's stories get erased. All these people saying no woman on the front lines. And then there's Maggie Higgins at the Battle of Chosin. She was there. And so I read her memoir. I managed to get a copy of her 1952 book, which was amazing for my research. So Ellie is crafted. She gives me a good background of what Ellie would have gone through as a female journalist, because Maggie Higgins does write about how she was told there are no facilities for women here. Also, not true. There are female nurses.
Right.
You have to like sleep on the docks and anyway, like constantly beg for rides. So Ellie, it's that. And I looked at Hazel Ying Lee, who was a Chinese American pilot during World War II, to kind of think about what Ellie might have gone through in this field.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, you know, from the human rights perspective, I at one point wanted to be a journalist too, back when I was kind of figuring out. And so there is this shared goal of wanting to tell stories, seeing something and wanting people to know about it and needing people to know about it. And that Ellie has that. Maybe it's also kind of like, so you insert yourself where you don't necessarily, you know, belong, because you want to find out, like you have a curiosity, and it's not even enough for you to know, you want everybody else to know too. So I think that's why, you know, Ellie had to be some type of like, either a writer where she is looking for information. Like that's her, like she's focused on getting the story and getting the information.
Well, and before I ask you to you know to tell our viewers just the overview of what this story is about without spoilers, because I'm trying to avoid spoilers. The whole goal here is to get folks to go out and read this fantastic story. I just have to say that there were so many similarities between myself and Ellie that I even tabbed this one page, and I just want to say a couple things here. So she's a war correspondent. I was in the U.S. Air Force for 4 years, and I was a journalist.
Oh my goodness, you're Ellie, essentially. Like, wow.
Yeah, and I actually went overseas to cover stories, and one of the places that they flew me to interview our distributed troops was in Saudi Arabia.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I felt when I landed there that feeling of being a woman, and because Riyadh is a Saudi Arabian air base, and here I am, a woman in uniform, you know, and they told me when they were driving me to my off-base quarters that I had to sit in the back seat of the car, even though there was no one else. It was just me and the driver. He says, "You
Oh.
have to sit in the back seat." He goes, "It's not our rules, it's theirs." You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
just feeling the daggers that, you know, the men would look at women in uniform, and that was not okay over there, you know? So kind of feeling like, wow, I really feel how it is to be a woman and kind of looked at like, you don't belong here,
Yes,
you
yes.
know? So that just resonated with me so much. I'm like, I feel this, you know, and I was there to ask questions and write stories. But I also love the fact that I've never been able to articulate this well on my own channel, because military history, I'm really interested in military history. And you have this one passage, and as soon as I read it, I was like, oh my God, and I underlined it. I'm like, Ellie, this is me. She says here in this one passage, I was so fascinated by military action, by the coordination that allowed hundreds of thousands of people to operate as one, to become an incredible school of fish that conquered not only the sea, but also the sky. And I just was like, yes, that's it. But then she goes on to say, it wasn't that I was apathetic about, you know, the devastation of what wars do and military movements do, but rather I examined armed conflict like a detective might study a murder. The more we knew about war, the better we would be at preventing it, and if necessary, winning it. So I was just like, that's it right there. You know, I study military history too, because I'm very fascinated by the movements, but also how can we avoid this in the future? So
Yes, so that's definitely a feeling that I have when I was writing Ellie's character, because so we went on a vacation somewhere and we happened to run into a reenactment of, like, I think a French and British battle in the Revolutionary War. And I was with my son and I was like, oh, let's go watch it. And he goes, but Mom, you hate war. And I was like, I do hate war, but I love history. And I do think when you study history, of course you hate war, because when you study what happens, how can you not hate it? But
Right.
then I've always also been very interested in military history. And part of what a huge thing I had to delete in this book was all of our developments on medical evacuation, just all the new technology. I think we cut the casualties in half
Yeah.
from World War II. I think that's deleted from the book, but I have this whole thing about that and did the whole paragraph. But yeah, I've always been interested in it. And I had, there was some comment somewhere where someone was saying women don't like to read about war. And I was complaining to a male friend of mine, like, how could they say that? And he made a mention. He was saying, like, you are in a self-selecting group of women who are very fascinated by war. And I thought about that when I was writing Ellie too. And granted, you know, in my academic field, I of course end up meeting other women who are very interested in history, including military history. And I think that I do still think it's an underestimation. I do feel like there is, most of my readers are women. So obviously there are a lot of women who are very interested in these topics. And
Yes.
I think that there is this idea that women or war doesn't affect women. I think it was some podcaster who made a comment like, ladies sit down when war is being discussed because you can't be drafted, or something really ridiculous like that. But I mean, women are interested in these fields. And I think it is kind of an antiquated idea that this is a field for men, which obviously isn't the case. Ellie does have to, you know, push against that, though. I think even with her own family, who's kind of like, you know,
Yes.
why are you doing this? Like, we left war. Why are you going to war?
Right.
But a lot of that is from my own personal fascination by geopolitics. So this is very much a history and geopolitics lover book.
Oh yeah. Oh, it was all over it. I mean, I just was like reading it, and well, gosh, I'm so excited. I need to pull back and have you just give a brief, like, you know, give us the brief, like, you know, what is happening in this book, without spoilers, so that people can get a sense of, you know, what Ellie, you know, is up against in this novel.
So Ellie is a Taiwanese American. She's ethnic Chinese, but Taiwanese, and that's very important for her language abilities. So she is a Taiwanese American correspondent who is eager to move up the ladder. And a lot of it, of course, talks about those challenges, but she wants to go cover the Battle of Chosin, which, for those who are familiar with the Korean War, might already know it. For those who aren't, the Battle of Chosin is this very pivotal battle, where essentially the US is about to begin the largest evacuation by sea in its history at that time. It might still be the largest evacuation, which I knew nothing about before researching this in depth. So in the process, her plane gets shot down and she gets stranded in North Korea, specifically a town called Gangye, which is close to the Chinese border. And from there, she has to find her way home. But it is she is in enemy territory, technically. And she almost gets, I don't think this is a spoiler, but she is in danger because the North Korean People's Army finds her, and she is ultimately saved by this older Korean woman who initially it seems like she mistakes her for her daughter. And this woman takes Ellie under her wing, and through that, Ellie is able to survive. And the two of them end up trying to go south. And this woman, who Ellie calls Emma, lost her daughter in World War II and is always trying to find her. So Ellie is sort of a stand-in at the moment. And so when I first started writing this book, the original title, I thought about calling it The Changeling, but I guess that's too sci-fi, and it didn't work in the end, because Ellie is ends up being a stand-in for her daughter. And that is intentional. I mean, it's meant to sort of speak about the universality of motherhood and these family bonds in war.
Wow, yeah, and the other women in this novel too, I mean, they play a large part in this, obviously. Do you want to talk about like how you created the characters of Emma, and then and who doesn't love is it pronounced emo?
Emo, yeah.
Emo. Oh, I I took to her right away. Maybe it's the contrarian. I'm like, oh, she's a firecracker.
Yeah. So when I was thinking of the story, it began with just Emma and Ellie. And the way I write stories is I always think of the characters first. And Emo invented herself and introduced herself and became sort of this third wheel, because I always imagined the story as just Emma and Ellie, but somehow Emo came in. When I write my books, I never outline them. I write from start to finish. I can only do that. I actually cannot outline. And I think of what Isabel Allende made this comment about, how when she writes, she sits down with her characters and listens to what they have to say. And I think that's the closest that I've heard to my own process, where I have these characters and I take some time to figure out who they are. And then gradually through the story, it's almost like they do take up a life of their own, and the story sort of forms around them. So in contrast to Daughters was about the impact of war on women. The Young Will Remember is also about that, but what I wanted to do with this book is also to show the contributions of women in war, because women are active, like not just at that time, both China and North Korea did have women in active combat. They had, I think they had an all-women sniper unit. They had women pilots actually in combat too. But in addition to that, you have women like Ellie who are bringing the stories back home. You have women like, I don't want to give too much away, but you do have women who are human rights activists. You have women who are doctors. There's a very deliberate scene about birth. Women in war, babies do not stop for birth. There are women who are remaining, who are delivering and going through all of that. And this book I can't highlight all of them just because there's so much, but I did really want to show that women aren't just victims of war. They are part of the process. They need to be part of the peace process as well. I mean, they aren't just on the sidelines having things happen to them. They're very, they take leadership roles too, despite all of the forces preventing them from doing so.
Yes, that is so clear. It makes me scratch my head sometimes to wonder why, some, men, or some people, not all men, but I'm just saying some people will have that perception that, women and children are on the sidelines while the men fight at it. But no, when war happens, it's a totality of society, especially, in the 20th century and onward, wars are just, not isolated.
No.
To some extent. I mean, it just, and it's so odd that we're talking now in a time of war, it's just like, and wars seem to be eternal, which is just another thing I personally study, because I'm like, why can't we seem to, cut this, why can't we quit it?
Yeah.
But the other aspect I wanted to talk about, because I found it just fascinating, and I hope you can maybe expand upon it and shed some light, was the language barriers were really intricate and complicated. I don't think I'm giving too much away to say, like you said, Ellie is, her plane goes down and she's trapped up in the north, kind of. And, but you have this mix. You have the Chinese, you have the Koreans and Japanese, all speaking different languages. Ellie can speak Chinese and Japanese, obviously English, right? But she does not speak Korean. And she has to remind herself too, while she's up there, I cannot break out into English at all. So could you talk about just the complexity of the language barriers and what that might have entailed for someone who was trying to not be found out as an outsider.
Yeah, so that would have been very tricky for her. And there's a character in the book, Pastor Peg, who is kind of based on my husband's grandfather, who was a pastor from Pyongyang. And he was fluent in Japanese because that was the language of education, because it was a colony, or Korea was a colony. So he spoke Korean, Japanese, but he also knew some Mandarin because I guess scholars would study Mandarin, not to the level where he'd really be able to have a full conversation, but enough that he could maybe communicate. And then he would have learned English from missionaries. So a lot of the missionaries did teach English. So I didn't realize what a huge missionary presence there had been in North Korea. But Ellie, in her case, I know my husband read an earlier draft, and he was saying that it would be so much easier if you just made her Korean, which actually is not true. I think it would be a lot harder, because for me, as someone who has Taiwanese and Chinese heritage, I can think about what a Taiwanese American would think if she was in that, but it'd be completely different if it was a Korean American. So I kept that. And so Ellie has to, she is able to speak to people who are educated. So people forced to learn Japanese, because again, the Japanese control the entire school system. So if you were educated formally, you would have had to speak Japanese. She would not be able to speak with someone who was outside of that. And that is dangerous for her. She can kind of pretend, but she can never sort of speak her home or native language. I think there's some times where I think with Jaemin, she's able to, but she's in a perpetual state of fear. And I think that's why her relationship with Emma is so important. She always has someone to kind of explain what's going on. So for me, I have a lot of Korean friends whose parents don't necessarily speak perfect English. So I do remember being at their houses and like listening to these conversations in Korean and not really understand. So I could actually mimic the not understanding Korean part quite well. And I remember I wrote some dialogue, and I had a Korean friend tell me, like, nobody actually talks like that. And I realized from my perspective as a non-Korean speaker, there's certain words that you always pick out, right? Like 괜찮아, like it's okay, it's okay. So for me, I'll hear Korean speaking something and I just hear blah, 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 괜찮아, or something. I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. But so that's why there are certain words that I pluck out a lot that Ellie picked out, because those were words that like I myself kind of remember because they're used so often when I like hear other people speaking Korean. But then I know I had to kind of adjust the dialogue because it sounds like people are having a conversation with just those words, which obviously isn't the case. And then to me, I don't realize that because I don't speak it. But yeah, so it definitely took a lot of editing.
Yeah, well, you made it, I'm sure it did take some editing, but like within those scenes where they're conversing and they're trying to converse, especially in the beginning when she first is taken, back with Emma, and she meets up with Emo and Pastor Pack. Is it Pack? Yeah. And Jaemin, is that how it's pronounced? Or Jamin?
It's probably like Jaemin, but my Korean pronunciation is not great. So
and I have none, so
yeah, I would not be the best person.
Probably butchering it. Yeah. But the rest of the book is just this I don't want to say it's an epic journey. It's very fraught, and this, the scenes of there's a lot of powerful scenes that just really depict the aftermath of war and the devastation. Do you think that something about the resilience? Is that kind of what you're trying to communicate through this book? Is just the women's ability to be resilient and to find a way forward, no matter the situation?
I think it's that for sure. It's the resilience, it's the courage, but also it really focuses on mothers and
Mm,
how damaging it is for, and this is universal for all mothers. I think that kind of was for me the strongest thread. Like no matter who we are, because Ellie is, she's American, but she's in North Korea. And this is a time when the US soldiers are actively in combat with Chinese soldiers, and she's Chinese American. So
mm,
I think she sees that humanity on both sides. And I do think that to fight a war, it's always accompanied by measures to dehumanize. And in some ways, I think people maybe have to in order to kill other people. But for this book, I really wanted to anchor that humanity. Like every mother mourns the loss of her children. Every kid is scared. There's a particular scene where you talk about how apparently it's very common for soldiers to call out for their mom or their wives. And Ellie does ask, what about women? There is sort of this idea that men call out for their mothers or their wives, but like, what about women? Like, who has been? And I don't know the answer to that, because I don't think there's been any, like, maybe there is a study somewhere that I'm not aware of, but it is just like, no matter who they are, what language they speak, this is universal.
mhm.
So I just wish that there's more of that emphasis even today, of just how it's not worth it. Like I never think not to say that there's never a situation where you have to, but generally speaking, nobody, like if you ask women everywhere, and men too, like ordinary people just want to live.
That's it, right?
Mhm,
Just they want to live. They want to live out their lives with their family and their friends.
mhm.
Uh, yeah, I don't know why it has to be the way it is. Like it's just the human condition, and that's another aspect of life that fascinates me.
Mhm.
Um, I'm drawn to studying like why do people choose the dark? Like we're talking dictators, despots.
Mhm.
I'm just like, why? Why does this happen? But to get back to your book real quick, and I know we're running out of time, but this has been so much fun. Uh, the young will remember, and then your publisher is Berkeley.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about if you have another project or if you're
Yes.
working on something
Yeah.
else. I
Um,
can't wait for it.
I am working on a few things actually. So I am looking at another historical fiction, although that's kind of on the back burner. One that I wanted to write, and it started as a fun project because, as you know, the Young Will Remember is so heavy and so dark at times. I actually started just a fun side project that I would turn to when I just needed a break from researching and writing about war. And that one is actually a vampire story, but so all of my vampires are older immigrant women. So the main character is this, she's an 80-year-old Chinese auntie named Scarlett, who lives in Chinatown, Manhattan. And the entire premise is that they just want to be left alone, but now there's a threat and they're forced to come out and fight it. So it's sort of, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of, the idea Scarlett is passed down from generation to generation because, she's a vampire, she lives forever. So she's
Right.
inherited by her descendants and they all have to kind of deal with her. But it's a lot of fun. Like I've really enjoyed, it's very different from the first two.
Mhm.
And that's sort of become a story of its own. And this is also why it's also become dark in some ways, because it is a story that's ultimately about like immigration and generational trauma. So
Yeah.
I I personally am not a fan of vampire stories. I can't do horror. And I had a friend who loves them, and she was saying the vampire is always a stand-in for something that's taboo in society in some way. And yeah, so when she said that, I
Okay.
was like, oh, that's interesting. So in mine, I guess it is sort of, being foreign or coming from another country. Um, it's a commentary too on the invisibility of older women as well, just how they're
Yes.
not in society, but then they also, can do a lot.
Hmm.
Not that they're not in society, but they're like marginalized from society in many ways. So that has its dark parts too. And I don't know if that's just the type of writer I am, that even if I write a comedy, there has to be like dark moments. But I have been really enjoying it. It's fun to write somebody like Scarlett, who is kind of based on my mom and my grandma. So she does a lot of things that like make me think of them.
Oh, this sounds like a fantastic book. Is this something that, well, yeah, is this coming out from Berkeley as well, or
Um, I don't know yet. It's
you don't
still
know yet?
under.
Okay.
Yes, it's been. It was originally part of my newsletter. I had a chapter coming out with my newsletter, and then eventually I realized, oh, this actually could be its own book. So I've paused it from my newsletter so I can tinker with
Okay.
it.
Well, in however it comes out, and I hope it does come out, sign me up. I'm
Okay.
a little bit of a, I do like some horror, I do read some horror. I draw the line at certain type of movies. I don't like, torture. I don't like anything like that. I like things that are like supernatural and spooky, you know, but
Yeah,
nothing too hardcore. But I think I understand what you're talking about. Like you're saying, I don't know why I sometimes have to include the dark stuff. I'm like that as well. I can't. I'm the type of person I can't. If someone asks me to go to see a Pixar movie, I'm like, no, thank you.
oh,
But if
I like
someone,
the. Sorry, yeah, I can.
you do, okay. I mean, I might, and then I might chuckle at it. But then if someone says, "Do you want to go see Nuremberg?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll go see that."
Mhm.
Because I think with me, it's like these are weighty matters,
Mhm.
like the things about life, like why,
Mhm.
I've always been really drawn to those type of things that, and you can't really have darkness without light, right? Like you lose the meaning of the words if you don't have that balance,
Mhm.
of light and dark. I don't know. I think it's something
I think it's a
metaphysical.
lot
I
of.
can't
Yeah,
describe.
it's human psychology, but also I find that in these dark times, you do see people coming together. And I think that's for me, for all of my stories, that is probably the common thread, that when there are horrible things happening, there's also tremendous courage, there's
Mhm.
love, there's people crossing boundaries to
Yeah.
help each other. And I think that's sort of what I love the most, or what I set out to write about with The Young Will Remember, is literally women on the opposite sides of a war,
Mm.
forming not just a friendship, but almost a family relationship. Because again, like in the end, we are all human. It is very natural for us to love each other when there's something so horrible going on.
Absolutely. Oh, that is so, you've said that so eloquently. Thank you. That it gets right to the heart of it. That even in dark times, it might bring out the worst in humanity, but at the same time, it also can bring out the best.
Hmm.
And I like that you focus on the best. You kind of you thread that up through the story, and it surfaces the
Hmm.
beauty of those connections, the human connection. So
Hmm.
thank you for writing such wonderful books, especially this one right here, "The Young Will Remember," out
Thank
May
you.
5th.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming on, Eve. I wish you every success with the book. And you're probably not ready to talk about the historical fiction novel that you have brewing in the back of your brain there, but if you do, let me know.
Not yet, because I think it's still so early, but
Okay.
once I get to it, I would be happy to tell you about it.
Okay. Sounds
Yeah,
great.
that's
Well then,
done after Scarlett gets her time to
oh,
shine.
Scarlett, her time to shine, to sparkle. Is she a vampire that sparkles? Just kidding.
No, she isn't. There's actually a joke about that in the book where it's like they don't really sparkle, they just die in the sun. So yeah.
Yeah, we always have to make that reference. Are they a sparkly vampire? Nope. Okay, then they're bad news.
She's a traditional. I mean, that's part of it, right? Because Scarlett always says, like, there's a lot of rules to being a vampire, and they're actually very fragile. They can be killed by, the sun. You don't plan properly, and then you're out at 6 a.m. And yeah, so part of it, she's like, teenagers can't even remember to like take their medicine or their vitamins every day, but like I take my medicine every day. I can, but anyway, so it's like a lighthearted vampire story. Definitely not horror. Like I would not categorize it at horror, but I don't know how what the rules are on book categories. Maybe it would be
like a dark comedy, right? Maybe a dark comedy.
something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Well, you definitely deserve that palate cleanser after, looking at some heavy themes here in your last two books. So I hope you continue to have fun writing it, and I look forward to seeing it come out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thanks for joining us here at BookBrowse. We'll be back again soon, but thank you to Eve for joining us. And I highly recommend both Eve's books, Daughters of Shandong and The Young Will Remember. This is powerful reading. It hit all of the notes that I love: military history, just history of the Korean War. I love that you even got into, how Christianity came about in North Korea. Mm-hmm. Even that little known fact about Kim Il-sung, who used to be a Christian, or sorry, he was a Christian at one point in his life, but then he went down a dark path. But there's everything in this book. So guys, please go out and check it out. And thanks again, Eve, for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon.